since we kind of mentioned, I kind of mentioned Strategic Command World War One, and we're about a day before its release. I know you guys got a chance to play it, so what do you guys think of Strategic Command World War One?
Well, thank you for transitioning. I don't want to fill up on the appetizer when we got the main dish in front of us. I'm very glad.
Everybody knows the appetizers are the best.
That's okay. That's a good counterpoint, unfortunately, to my point. But nonetheless, Strategic Command World War One. I want to just say that I came from a background of having kind of bounced off World War Two. I think that I like this kind of game in theory. I love hex-based war games. It reminds me of some of my favorite games. One of my favorite games of all time is Advanced Tactics Gold, also from Slytherin and Matrix. And the first time I saw the Strategic Command World War II, the reason why I didn't really like it is when I don't know why, but when I see this 10 number strength thing, it immediately reminds me of Order of Battle. And as I already mentioned, for some reason, Order of Battle never sucked me in. So another problem is this also has a pretty big initial learning curve. So to actually play World War One, I finally dove in. I think that this game plays better. The hex-based style plays better for World War One trench warfare. I'm not sure if it really can capture, or I think it's more difficult for it to capture some of the strategies that were involved in World War Two, like the Blitzkrieg, the Schwerpunkt, and all that stuff like that. I mean, especially if you have stacking limits. The World War Two idea was, it was developed in World War One, but really, perfected in World War Two with tanks. Is you have gained force superiority in a particular location, you break through the line, and then you exploit it with high-speed mobile units. I don't think that hex-based war games with zones of control and stuff like that do a very good job of modeling that. So I found the same problem with Advanced Tactics Gold. Nonetheless, my opinion of World War One, Strategic Command World War One, is very positive. I did like a stream of it, and I was like basically trying to feel out the game. And I was just expecting to do a stream to try to like just here's this game, put it out there for the people, and walk away. And I've actually been thinking about the game every day since. And that, to me, whenever that happens, that's a sign of a really good game. There's something here which is bringing me back, and that's so already, without really having played the game for that many hours, maybe like 10 hours, I have a very positive impression of this game. But I'll let Matt, why don't you say something as well?
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you say that, because I played a lot of Strategic Command World War II. I played Strategic Command World War in Europe, which was the first World War II game that they did with Fury. So Fury Software is the developer of this game. Strategic Command is a long-running series that has been in existence since late 90s, early 2000s. They were originally published over on Battlefront, so the publishers of Combat Mission. And I remember in the late 90s, early 2000s, running into this game, playing the demo, and really enjoying it. They published 3 or 4 games over there, and then, was it 2016 or 2015, roughly around there? Might have been 2014, I don't know, a couple years ago. Fury Software remade Strategic Command, the first Strategic Command, and they called it War in Europe. Turn-based, grand strategy game, takes place in World War II, specifically in the European front. They remade it, they repackaged it, they made it look really nice compared to some of the old stuff, and they were published by Matrix and Slytherin. 2 years later, they came out with Strategic Command World War II, World at War, which took the European theater and made it global. And the same basically game, they just added China, Japan, and the Pacific. And then, now this game, Strategic Command World War I, is, I think, the third of these newer versions of this series. And this is going back to World War I, again, turn-based, grand strategy game, war game that allows you to play as either the Entente, the Allies, or the Central Powers, the Axis. And there's a lot that I liked about the World War II games. I actually thought they did mobile warfare pretty well in the World War II games. They have this mechanic where as units move throughout the map, there's a line basically that's represented, which shows you the front line in the map. And I thought that Strategic Command did a really good job in the World War II game of giving you the ebb and flow sense of a mobile conflict, and really gave you that sense of penetrating through the enemy line, racing around them, pincering around them, surrounding them, cutting their supply off, and then over the next couple of weeks, whittling that pocket down to nothingness. And I thought, while yes, there are limitations to the way that a turn-based game can model armored warfare, I think it did that right. When I played that game, I was not looking to wear the enemy down. I was looking to find weak points that I could break through and then encircle and reduce large numbers of enemy units, so then I could kind of continue advancing. And it had this very sort of Eastern Front vibe to me, where I was always trying to just find these ways to whittle the enemy down, wear them down, and win a mobile conflict. And I think the early war period, it does a really decent job as well of modeling the Western Front. But I think where it really shines is sort of the Eastern theater of the later period of the war. And so playing the World War I game, I don't know. I haven't played it as much as you, Tortuga, but I think one of the things that bothers me about this is that it goes back to sort of the map of just Europe. There's no Pacific. There's no, nothing outside of North Africa and Turkey and the near Middle East, and then Europe itself, which is for a World War I game perfectly fine. You don't have to talk about the colonial stuff that was going on in Asia or Africa or anything like that. But I think the part that is a little bit jarring to me is World War I is very much this grinded out conflict in trenches and whatnot. And I think this game will probably feel about right as I get further into it and get more into the entrenched period of the game. But I don't think it models the early war period of the game very well. And what I mean by that is, as the Central Powers, I play as the Central Powers, I declare war on Belgium, my German troops are in position to launch a blitzkrieg into Belgium, and I don't find any sense of there being a mobile campaign. It just feels too slogged out. So obviously this is World War I, so there's not tank units, there are cavalry units, there are air units, there are artillery units, and there's infantry units at the start, excluding the naval stuff, because there's that too. And so when I attack Belgium, I get some initial good dice rolls or whatever. It tells me, 1 to 3, you're going to take 1 casualty, inflict 3 casualties on the Belgians at Liège, the fortification there, and I overrun that. But it never feels to me like I've broken through the enemy front and I'm racing on Paris. I never get that late spring sort of crisis moment where it feels like I'm this overwhelming force that has outflanked the French army, that the small British army is just a little bit of a delaying formation in my front, and that all of a sudden an Allied counterattack stops me. I never feel in this game like there's that sense of mobile warfare going on. It just feels like a slog, and it's kind of like, how far can I push them before the entrenchments get too high and the casualties start racking up to be too great? And I would contrast that with an older game called Commander the Great War, which also looked at the First World War, was also a turn-based strategy game that basically covers the exact same period of time in the same theaters. And in that game, you very much felt like mobile warfare was occurring, and you were racing across large swaths of open ground and then engaging enemy troops in very bloody open field fights. And you often would have this big showdown in front of Paris that would decide whether France falls early or whether you have something that more models the historical conflict. And I'll stop lecturing because I've been talking way too long at this point and want to hear Jean's point of view. But I do think the early war mobile warfare element of this game is lacking, and it feels too attrition-based, too early in the conflict.
I just want to weigh in that really briefly. Sorry, Jean, but I think that all of the points you said were really good, and we'll talk a little bit more about those. But before I forget, I have had that mobile breakthrough type thing. I feel it's a bit shoehorned because, so I did break through Belgium at one point. I think I was telling you about it. Like, I got cavalry all the way into France on the first turn, and so that I had this sense that, Paris is right before my eyes. But the way the game does it, on the very next turn, or really on the first turn for the Entente, they spawn some French units immediately that just stop you from getting there. And they weren't there before, they just suddenly appear on the map. So if you're just playing it for the first time, that feels like horrible. You're like, what? I could see it, it's right in front of me. And then suddenly this unit just spawns right in front of you. It's just a game mechanic. But anyways, just to say, I have had a little bit of that. I think that we should talk a little bit more about this after Jean mentions his opinions. Maybe the mobile aspect of things is more apparent on the Eastern Front. But first, Sean, what do you think?
Yeah, so I agree with you on that. So I know that World War One was a slog fest, and I realized the beginning of the war in 1914. The Germans penetrated Belgium, and they were on within sight of Paris, and they were being very mobile. And they could have taken Paris, but that's a whole nother thing. I realized that to emulate that in this game was going to be a challenge, mainly because you have to implement the trench warfare system, but also include some mobile kind of capabilities. Immediately when I started playing this game, I did not go to war against Belgium or Netherlands. I decided to focus on the east and just kind of set up trench warfare on between the Belgian border and the Swiss, and just set up a nice little chunk there until I can deal with the Russians, and then eventually go after the Belgians, and then come after France. Honestly, even in the beginning parts of World War One, the Germans were taking heavy, heavy losses because the beginning of trench warfare was starting to peak out. They were taking horrendous losses on the front because of the technology of just mass combat was happening. And they did get bogged down here and there, and eventually found openings, and got too close to Paris. I do feel on the Eastern Front, it's very mobile. I'm able to utilize the cavalry, kind of get behind their lines, use infantry, and there's a lot more space to do your shit. I feel like the game portrays World War One combat as best as it can in terms of hex space. You're never going to get the most perfect solution because it's a hex-based conflict, and it's not a daily conflict, right? It's, I believe, what, per every 2 weeks or per week, whatever kind of terms. Overall, playing the game, I feel like they took the best parts of Strategic Command, World War II, World at War, and incorporated it into World War One, right? Because that's what we want. We want the awesomeness of World War II in World War One, right? And then model it for that conflict. And I felt like they did that. On top of implementing trench warfare, one thing that I did like with that trench warfare, if I can add in, is the fact that if you move your units, right, like let's say you move a infantry unit, right, and obviously you got to entrench a lot because it's World War One, right? They set up the AI that if you move your unit, the AI will project like, hey, I should probably entrench. So it actually takes one thing from you having to micromanage every fucking unit in the game, because you're gonna have dozens of units, and if you have to entrench each one for each hex, it becomes a pain in the ass. Uh, but I like the fact that they focused on that. They also added other things like mines into the game, which I believe they didn't add in before in other games.